Yes, so the work I do probably addresses some of the questions about inclusiveness that come up today. It's part of the jigsaw that's been assembled, and I think it's very different. My background is in design, but in social design. And so what I'm going to take you through is some actual examples in a very kind of microcosmic way, of ways of connecting people to the bigger questions that we've been talking about today. So when I say people, it's not in a kind of human factors way, although that was really fascinating. It's kind of in the, if we're going to participate in this as a whole, as a democracy, what does that start to look like? And the first example that I want to talk about, well, I've just to cite that I have actually got a background with tram systems and goodness knows what in terms of technology, but I've almost entirely moved away from those aspects at the moment because I'm really interested in what happens to people in a mediated world when it's not only about the technology, it's the technology to enhance life. So, how do we find out about what people care about? And so principally I'm going to be talking about methods of engagement, and I'm going to talk quickly through 3 different projects, principally looking at how we achieved our effects. But if you're interested in any of the outcomes that I don't touch on, then I hope that that will be something for the panel or just talk to me afterwards. So the first one is a project called Fair Tracing. And what we were doing, we're kind of related in a way to our last speaker. We were looking at what happens if small producers of ethical goods are connected up along the supply chain to their consumers in other parts of the world. At the time we started, the carbon footprint wasn't nearly such a big issue as it became during the course of the investigation. And the idea was that actually this was going to be a highly ethical project because it enabled people to speak directly, and ethical consumers could ask questions of ethical producers and encourage their trade. So we were working with a small collective in Chile that made wine. Sometimes you get good gigs. And what we were doing was looking at the progress. From the bottom we have the Chilean cooperative, and then it went through the exporter to the importer to the consumer. And we were tracing it with the Chilean cooperative. So this is a really complex diagram that I'm not going to go right through. But it was interesting to discover where the pockets were, where they had high tech, where they had no kind of technology at all to support them. So one of the things that was possibly interesting for them was how they could work together within the actual cooperative to learn more about what they were doing. And here we have them building their own value chain and starting to ask about what they knew and what they didn't know in their own organisation, what they could know and what they could share with customers to enhance their experience of shopping. And a marvellous small business spent quite a lot of time working on this with us together. And this was actually what they came up with, and it's in Spanish, and I'm not going to, again, expect you to follow it through. But what they did was then reflect on their own practice in a really different way and start to see themselves not merely as suppliers, but as people in dialogue with these communities. And they actually have a very strong presence. Well, they did, unfortunately, they imploded during financial problems. But they did a very strong presence, and a lot of the fair trade Chilean wine that we're drinking in this country was actually something that they could tell stories about. So I bring that up as an example of the kind of thing where we were doing something with really very skilled people who knew their product very well. Now I want to talk about a project which involves people who are actually very marginalised from technology and not conversant with it at all. So we particularly picked a group of people who were largely, well, actually left outside discussions of design quite often, and this is people in their 70s and 80s. I think they get marginalised sometimes because they're seen as that they've had their day, or they've got nothing left to contribute. But actually they make a wonderful cross-section of the population because they have so much life experience. And one of the challenges that people were coming up against was, how do you understand the Internet of Things and this kind of notion that everything's going to travel with information? So very much speaking to what our Chilean wine producers were starting to do, which was to use auto-identity capture so that these bottles could transfer with stories attached. Were our people in Britain, in the East End of London, going to be responding to that kind of thing? How are they going to understand it? And indeed, what kind of technologies did they want and what values did they want to bring? So this cartoon was something which just kind of captured this idea that if you don't understand the Internet of Things and the idea of an information layer, you just don't understand it. What did we do? So this was just a summary of what we were doing. We helped devise methods to engage people outside the design world in discussions, help them envisage new social relations, and to equip people with the challenges of conceptualising stuff that's really quite hard to conceive of if you're not actually within computer science and networks. So what did we do? Well, the very first thing we did with this group of people was get them making something, because the very idea that making and that the world is a very designed place is not part of their normal currency of thinking. It's not that they don't think about it, it's just that it's not foregrounded. So we thought, well, how do we get people actually thinking about those kind of issues? So we started very lo-fi with bits of paper. And we progressed to timelines. So they put a lot of thought into the kinds of products they'd used in the past and how they connected with their life events. And then they put some thought into the future. And we used this as an evaluative technique towards the end as well, to get them to come back to their future and see whether they had changed their conception of what goes on. It was quite interesting because to start with they were saying things like space travel and food in pill form. And when we challenged them and said, well actually that's happened, they went, oh yes, it has. Right, well what actually is the future going to be about? And those sorts of questions, which was really interesting to be working with because clearly you're actually moving into new spaces. So then we exhibited them. But the one that I really want to tell you about is somebody called Vi. You can see a whole pile of props on the table here. And she was challenged to take one and use it to create a story about her future self. So she created this alter ego called Tallulah. And I'm just going to read you these couple of sections from it. Tell the story of your object from the point of view of your character. Well, this glove has found a most beautiful owner. She's a dancer. She does exotic dancing. She travels the world, and therefore so do I. I've looked after her very much, so I've stroked many a fine face. It's just used when I'm doing my exotic dancing to attract a man, and anything that can attract a man has got to be good, at which point the whole group laughed. And our performance artist who was working with us said, you just hold that. And she said, well, you said to get into the part. And here she is, trying it on. So, jumping forward a little, if I could ask you, Tallulah, 100 years from now, you're bucking the system, which is more rigid than the one we had today. She'd already described it for us. And if this, the glove, could be some kind of invention, what would it be? So she takes the glove and she strokes it. It would be a mirror into somebody's soul. So if ever anybody came in, I would know whether they was going to be good to me or that anybody did come into contact with, because there's so much advance, I'd be able to tell. This device would work so that she could actually vet each man that came in. Okay. How did that happen? Well, he brought a glove with him, and he went, when you put that glove on, then it will show you a picture within your own mind, though that person didn't change, but within your own mind something happened. You know, like when you have a dream and it was like this hallucination, and you could see that this person was a caring person, and she puts on the glove. So you can see that through this person's eye, through this glove, she reaches out. As soon as you shook hands, once you had contact, as soon as you have contact, you go, ooh, can you feel it? Does that mean you can see into my soul? I can. And you can actually see her doing the work of invention here. There's a lot of ingenuity going on in this exchange. I'll just run it through you visually. She's talking about seeing, and then she reaches out and touches. Yes, you can see into my soul. And so what we were doing here wasn't working to actually make viable designs, although a designer might find that quite inspiring. What we were actually doing was sensitizing people to the idea that networks and new kinds of relationship might be possible. And what she said and she didn't say this directly to us, so we'll hope that she actually meant it. She said it to somebody who interviewed her about the project. We went in as old people and came out as people with our own thoughts and agendas. Now, we didn't dictate at all what kind of agendas those should be. In the context of digital networks, we hoped that it would be future thinking, joined up relationship type stuff. What actually happened was that while that was actually Vi's experience, and she then got laptops for the local community and all sorts of things, these guys were part of it as well. And you can see behind them, they've got a picture of the Thames Barrage, and just below it are some superimposed water turbines. They don't exist. So the group went off to build them. And this is them standing on a barge outside Westminster with an engineer they found who can build turbines, and has been developing for the last 5 years a novel turbine. On top, up here, you can see an air turbine they created, which powered their geyser power sign. They then launched their water turbine last October. Now, we just set them running. We were absolutely blown away by what came out of this democratising technology project. They managed to keep this loose aggregation of people around them that have been co-developing this. It's not specifically about transport, it is probably about smart cities, and it's definitely about people taking enterprise and making their own way in the world. So I'm going to introduce you to one more project, and I'm going to whiz through this one because I'd like to spend just a moment thinking about how we achieved it. And this one was called Flexible Dwellings for Extended Living. It was particularly, again, looking at the kind of thing that comes out of starting with values rather than necessarily projects that are technologically based. And really, the big question in this one was, it was an even bigger question, as how do we want to live together? What do we want the future to be like? And we did it by holding tea parties. So again, I'm stressing the way that we achieved it a little bit, because I think that part of this is sometimes that it is a daunting project to engage people, but actually we just invited people to come and have tea, and these are strangers talking to each other about how they want to live together. And in a sense, we're modelling sort of the values that they really held dear about conviviality and about being able to sit down with people in a nice space. So we had tea, and we came back to questions that design the social and physical as well as the digital fabric of life, and looked at how those can trigger serendipitous conversations in a world where actually a lot of the digital stuff that we're talking about is taking people out of the physical environment in which they live. So even pension queues and things like that, which were one of the places that people meet, they're not available to people in the way they used to be because people are collecting their income through digital means. So how do we keep an awareness of others? Well, we gave them scones, and we put flags in. So rather than actually setting the conversational themes up by questioning, we put a whole lot of little triggers together so that people could arrive at their own discussions. And they took them out of the food before they ate them, which is probably just as well. And one of the things that was very interesting in the context of talking about smart cities and smart developments is that a thing that people really valued was the chance to engage with each other in a sensory way. That they wanted to be able to hear the street, they wanted to be able to smell other people's food cooking. They didn't want that to the point where it became invasive. They didn't want to hear their neighbours arguing. But they did want to be able to sit on the porch when they felt like it and be aware of other people. And that actually a lot of the tendencies, particularly in care for elderly and more vulnerable people, is away from that kind of engagement. And they're actually some of the people most at risk of social isolation. So how are we balancing that need to make things energy efficient and environmentally sound and safe with people's actual need for social engagement and conviviality? And that became a real tension in the project. We talked about it in terms of porous design in the end. So this was one of the quotes from the people who met together in Newcastle, and talking about what it is that we need to cultivate to keep our world true to the values that they were bringing to tea. And I'll just run through this one. It was a generosity of spirit, encourages people to communicate better, but it takes the odd eccentric in the group to start the ball rolling. You have to be a bit batty to do it, a bit cheeky, a bit pushy. I believe you have to take the first step and people will be grateful. Take the risk, because in all sorts of ways we're becoming such a risk-averse society, aren't we? So I think that's a challenge for us as we think about technology that makes the place safe, convenient, tidy, is that actually it takes away some of the things that also make us human, messy, vulnerable, and able to engage with each other. And I also think that I'm probably the maverick, the person who's being a bit batty, standing here talking to you about things that are not directly about transport, but possibly very important. So what principles were we adopting in doing this? Well, we started where people are at. We didn't start with the technology. That doesn't mean we weren't concerned with it. We were very concerned with it. But that wasn't where we started. We didn't start with scenarios. We really started with where people started and their own life experience. And then we moved together in the direction of inquiry. We built evocative settings in accessible places. We didn't take people into the university because that excludes a lot of people who are nervous about their educational levels. We held it in a local cafe, and it was an independent cafe, so we were supporting the local community. We devised themed activities about bonding and imagining so that people felt safe about it and could come with us on the journey. We asked what's important to value now and what needs to be kept in the future. And we expected our participants to be ingenious. So we didn't talk down to anybody. We were really concerned that we weren't designing for people, we were designing with people. And we worked out how to inspire them with interest in our own topic. So I think if I'm going to conclude then, it's make people care and they will build with you. So when transport becomes really pertinent to people, they're really all over it. We know that because everybody's always complaining about when it doesn't work and about standing around at the bottom of lifts, shafts that aren't actually sending elevators anywhere. So then the question is, how do we take people into the future so that they can actually engage with it meaningfully, but yet still be conceiving? And thanks to our funders, thanks to our participants, and if you have any questions at any point later, this is my email. Thank you.